From gas stations to hotel lobbies, victims of global human trafficking are hidden in plain sight. Traffickers coerce their victims into forced labor and prostitution. The International Labor Organization estimates that there are tens of millions of human trafficking victims worldwide. And the United Nations reports that the number of detected victims is on the rise. Great Decisions explores the stories of trafficking survivors.
I wanted to escape, but I couldn't.
Unchained, the scourge of human trafficking. Next on Great Decisions.
Great Decisions is produced by the Foreign Policy Association in association with Thomson Reuters. Funding for Great Decisions is provided by PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP and the Nelson B. Delavan Foundation.
Human trafficking unites leaders across the political spectrum.
In a few moments, I'll sign legislation continuing my administration's extensive efforts to combat the scourge of human trafficking.
It ought to concern every person because it is a debasement of our common humanity.
It is recognized as a major challenge for nations around the world.
As part of my anti-trafficking work, I've met victims in Russia. I've met victims in India. I've met victims that have been trafficked from Mexico, victims in New York and New Jersey and all across our country. I've been on FBI raids where I've seen things that no person should ever see.
Despite this attention, human trafficking is the world's third largest criminal industry, trailing only the drug and weapons trades.
The experts say up to 40 million people a year are being trafficked. They're being moved essentially in slave status.
The ILO estimates that approximately 5 million are held in forms of sexual servitude.
I didn't know much about human trafficking myself. Man, when you look at the numbers, it's like 150-something billion. I mean, it's just crazy, the numbers, you know?
Today, we announce the unsealing of sex trafficking charges against Jeffrey Epstein.
You can't really define it to one section of the city or one section of the United States or one section of the world, really. It is a true global threat.
Victims come from all walks of life, but it is often the most vulnerable who are preyed upon by traffickers. Those who have experienced violence in the past are particularly susceptible.
My childhood was very dysfunctional, with a mother who was trying her hardest to make ends meet for us.
I was born in Kenya, in the village of Kakamega. Since I was born, my life wasn't that good. My dad was sick, stroke, like for 20 years. My mom couldn't come with us to go get some money. So I ended up dropping school.
I grew up in Belgium, and I was born in 1963. My mother was not well. She started abusing me very early on, from birth on, I should say. And my stepfather became her enabler.
It's common for victims to meet their traffickers close to home. Traffickers use familiarity to tailor their methods of recruitment and control.
I haven't seen any of the dramatics in the event of opening up shipping containers and seeing people chained. It's more of like a grooming process.
It's much easier to bring someone along willingly, who's traveling willingly, who's voluntarily crossing a border. Much easier to do that.
It could be your kids, it could be your daughter. I mean, I have 5 kids, you know. Can you imagine just to try educating the people more that there is an issue and it's happening in our own backyard? We need to do something about it.
The average age a person enters the sex trade in the U.S. is between 12 and 14 years old. Traffickers themselves average 28 and a half for their first arrest on charges of trafficking.
I do believe that my family was targeted when we first moved to this village. The woman who was the contact person with the network was aware that my mother wasn't well, and so she knew that she could use me. I was 5. She and her husband took me, as well as other children, on outings.
It started when I was much younger, when I was like 13, 14.
Most of the clients who are sex trafficked that we work with have come into it through a romantic relationship. And over time, as the rapport is built, you have this emotional attachment between the future victim and the trafficker.
I come from a background of poverty and oppression, so I was always looking to fill the voids that were there. I was actually like excited because I'm like, wow, like this older guy likes me, you know? Like finally someone is paying attention to me.
Many victims are sexually assaulted by traffickers.
I didn't like the woman, and the husband raped me, and then they took me and 3 other girls to this orgy. It was in a castle. I was taken out by someone who was acting as some kind of a middle person, and he raped me.
Labor trafficking victims are often coping with financial challenges. Most are foreign nationals, compounding their vulnerability.
The number one thing that we see for our labor traffic clients is the desire to provide for their families.
I get pregnant in an earlier age. I went back home. Now it's like I bring a lot of problem to my parents. My dad is sick. My mom is there. Now I have a baby.
Many labor victims are recruited through well-known channels for what they feel are legitimate jobs. These underground workers have a significant impact on the larger economy. It is estimated that forced labor generates billions for the private economy globally.
All of the goods and services that we buy have the potential to be tainted by forced labor.
I went to Nairobi City. There they pay good money. They were a nice family. I worked for them for 11 good years. So while I'm still there, I meet this lady. She told me, I have this lady. She's in America. She's looking for a nanny. I'm like, wow, I would love to go.
The vast majority of our labor traffic clients come to the US on valid visas. So they come here with legal status, intending to do work in whatever the promised industry was, and instead they find something very different.
The visas themselves are tied to the employer, and because they're tied to the employer, it makes it almost impossible for that person to leave a situation of forced labor.
So when I came here, the lady came and picked me. I'm new. I thought maybe she's gonna help me like to carry things. I'm struggling, I don't have shoes. We get in the house, no food. She told me, you're an idiot. You're just a slave. You'll just work for us.
Once a victim has been ensnared, there can be a feeling that there's no way out.
It went at first from feeling loved and accepted to then being kind of scared, like, wow, this is really happening. I got numb pretty quick. It just became a new normal.
I was abused a lot. I was trafficked to the United States. That was an entire month. And then I was sent to Germany to get training to be a sex slave to the elite. That was another month. My parents went on holiday without me. I don't know if they knew that I would ever come back.
October, she didn't pay me. I waited. November, I'm like, this is Christmas. You know, people need some money. And you know, I have a baby back home. I came here working hard because of her and my parents.
Traffickers use multiple forms of violence to maintain control.
With respect to force, that can constitute sensory deprivation or food deprivation. It can constitute physical assault or beatings, burnings, tattooing, brandings, markings. Traffickers also use fraud and coercion to keep their victims in line.
They'll force you to stay in the area of coercion where, you know, if you don't stay and keep doing this for me, I'm going to report you to the authorities.
I just heard a different story, you know, from some of the survivors that comes and, you know, through the events that we have at the stadium and just share their stories. They use these victims that they kind of brainwash them to do different things. It's crazy, you know?
I was taken to another place. There was a basement of some kind. It showed me the body of a young woman who had clearly just been killed. And just very casually said that we like you. We don't want this to happen to you.
There was nothing that needed to be pumped into me to make me comply. You knew what you had to do, and you would just do it. And if you came out of line, then there would be repercussions. And those repercussions would be like getting beat.
The way she was threatening me, if you do something, I will call you police, you will go to jail. I'm from Kenya, no family here. If I go to jail, my people, my family, how they gonna reach me in case I die here? When she was telling me she can throw me through the window, I go to the Hudson River. Who's gonna see that body floating on the river? Nobody.
Victims often fear law enforcement as much as they fear their captors. A criminal record for prostitution negatively impacts the victim's ability to work, find adequate housing, and be an accepted member of the community.
We do see a lot of sex traffic clients who are arrested for prostitution, which is illegal, and they're not immediately or ever identified as sex trafficking victims.
I actually did have run-ins with the law on multiple occasions, and law enforcement, they were just so brutal and nasty, and as if I was like a killer or something.
I was 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, so I thought that I was a shameful human being, that I was worthless, that I was the lowest of the low. So the idea of going to tell someone was just the farthest thing from my mind.
Labor victims, far from their country of origin, are very conscious of their lack of status in their new home. Physical and mental health decline rapidly for many victims.
So, bad luck, I got sick. She came to the room, why you're not waking up? I'm like, I'm not feeling okay. I was just crying, I'm shivering. Well, I'm sick and I'm trying to work. I'm sick, I'm trying to work. I'm sick, I'm trying to work. How am I gonna do?
There is physical violence on the forced labor side, but there's also violence of neglect. There are cases of domestic servitude where people walk out of a house after 10, 15, 20 years of being held in forced labor in that house, and they need $20,000 worth of dental work because their teeth are all falling out, because traffickers definitely don't take you to the dentist, but they also don't give you a toothbrush.
Once in the cycle of trafficking, it's very difficult for victims to break free. It's hard for victims to know whom they can trust. With no one to turn to, at times only a lucky turn of fate can bring freedom.
And so you can imagine that if you've been trafficked, you've been potentially held against your will, or you've had threats made against you and your family, you've been threatened to be turned over to law enforcement, you've been physically assaulted, you've been confined. Clearly, there's a lack of trust there with people you don't know.
For Lisa, that turn of fate came after 4 years of being sex trafficked. An arrest helped her connect with Safe Horizon, an organization that assists trafficking victims.
The caseworker from the program was there, and she gave me her card. Anytime you would get locked up, your pimp would be nearby to take you home. The next day, I was supposed to go in to the program. And that very next day, he was arrested for unrelated matters, nothing to do with trafficking. So that's what gave me the courage to call.
Anneke broke free with the help of one of her abusers after being trafficked for 5.5 years.
He arranged a deal to get me out. He told me that I should never take money to sleep with anyone, never do it. I should go to Paris, London, New York. That's how he said it. I should marry. I should forget what happened. I should never speak about what happened. I should forget him.
For Susy, her constant illness eventually became too much and she had to see a doctor. That doctor's visit proved to be a turning point. Susy endured slave labor for 2 years. She was also helped by Safe Horizon.
And the doctor started asking me my question, why are you here? Before I say, I started explaining my story first. Then I feel like it's touching him, that story. Then he was like, wow. Before I start even treating you, let me call this number. He went to the phone, he's calling Safe Horizon.
We found it really critical that we train medical providers because they're on the front lines of identifying possible victims.
We've seen cases of trafficking victims who've become ill, and they've been literally dumped off at the emergency department, like dumped by the back door.
Life after trafficking can prove challenging. The victim has no financial resources to fall back on. And the stigma of sex work can make it difficult to reintegrate into society. On a psychological level, victims often have difficulty leaving a life they have grown accustomed to.
The stigma of the sex industry, not just in the United States, but across the world, is so potent that the added trauma of having been forced to engage in work that is in most places illegal, I think makes it harder to escape, and it can make it very difficult to recover.
It was very hard. It was extremely hard. You get used to a certain code of conduct when you're in the life versus when you're out of the life in the square world.
I was actually able to focus on healing, which is a rare privilege for someone who comes from a background of slavery. I spent 30 years just to heal.
Labor trafficking victims, just like sex trafficking victims, leave these situations of forced labor with incredible trauma. They may have PTSD, they may have all sorts of disruptions in their life that are related to trauma. They may have difficulty concentrating, they may have difficulty going back to school.
I don't have any course. I don't have any certificate. I don't know if I can, but I want to pay rent. I have my daughter. I have a granddaughter. I have my mom. So I'm working. I'm a hardworking woman. I work 7 days a week.
While all 3 women have been able to reconnect with their families, the toll trafficking has wrought on their relationships is immense.
I did not speak to my mother for most of my adult life. I just called the number that I had. She picked up the phone, and I called to forgive her. I wanted to set myself free of the resentment, and she said, "Oh, I can't believe it."
I've forgiven people of my past. I don't have that anger and resentment no more. My relationship with my siblings and my mother is as best as it can be given their circumstance and my circumstance.
I didn't see my daughter for 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, 5 years. So I waited, and then I just smelled African food, the smoked fish. That food smelling is from home. I saw I jumped at the airport. It was so nice, so happy.
Despite everything, they remain optimistic about the future.
I would like to go back to school and pursue social work mixed with law. I would like to represent the underprivileged because I have not had that.
I've learned so much that's really important, and I feel is really important for my soul to learn. Lessons about love, lessons about what love really is, that I would have never learned if it wasn't for the hardship that I endured. But it's cost me, it's cost me everything. It's a miracle that I'm alive.
The 3 victims are now survivors. Their experiences give them unique insights into fighting human trafficking. Susy wants victims to find the courage to speak up.
The important thing, don't be shy to tell your story no matter what. Please speak up. Speak up and have hope.
You know, one of the survivors that we work with, who was held in forced labor for years, She says, if you had just looked in my eyes, you could have seen it. If you had just looked in my eyes, you would have known.
Lisa believes the key is to alleviate the desperate poverty that forces many into human trafficking.
Why is there no laws in place that give us protection and access to basic human needs? Survivors need to feel empowered.
For Anneke, it's important for the most vulnerable in society to find hope and know their true value.
I wanted someone to come and give me hope. I wanted someone to come and say that I was innocent, which I didn't believe.
We know that there's massive underreporting when it comes not just to human trafficking, but to sex crimes in general. I think, first of all, the understanding in the wider population that this is something that happens in rich countries as well as poor countries is very important.
In 2018, the Department of State estimates that there were only 11,096 trafficking prosecutions in the world. Right, now put that next to the approximately 25 million people held in both forced labor and forced prostitution. About 25 million people and about 11,000 prosecutions.
The three women have a message for those in power. You must hold traffickers and their customers accountable.
So first of all, ending the criminalization of victims. Holding the individuals accountable and not a slap on the wrist, like actually giving men jail time, because when I was in the life, there was doctors and police officers and men of high authority that were engaging in this. And these are men who have money, who just pay people off. That's not okay.
When it comes to specific individuals of a certain class, whether it's through their money, wealth, on my side with the federal government, I mean, we'll prosecute anybody.
I don't think you can really be completely blind to this problem. Keep your eyes open and then tackle the problem of sex trafficking at the source.
The number of prosecutions for forced labor in the entire world, estimated by the State Department, approximately 450 in the world. So when you do the math shows you that if you're going to traffic people into forced labor, you are going to enjoy almost complete impunity.
It's happening, and the only way they can stop is if you gather a great group of powerful people, team up with them, and just do something about it.
According to the leaders and legislators Great Decisions spoke with, this is a major policy challenge that must be tackled head-on.
Are victims treated inappropriately in the United States and around the world? Absolutely. We have to change that.
Well, you have criminal rings that traffic women and youth, and they're very powerful. They have huge resources. Our government is trying to break them up in every way we can, but there's a lot of money to be made in that sex industry, and it's a big challenge, and we have to do more.
You change that by education, change that by training law enforcement to recognize that those who are trafficked are victims. That's how you get at this problem, and you establish credibility with those that have been caught in this web.
We've got to bring visibility and legal redress to the people that are creating the trafficking, not just focused on the poor victims of trafficking. And that gets into some powerful institutions sometimes.
When we started Strike Out Slavery in 2016, we partnered with the people with experience. For us, I think one thing that we tell majorly based on for ourselves, we tell people is like, hey, would you prefer your family, would you prefer your kids find out on the internet, or you prefer to have an event that people can be saved and learn the right way?
I think the number one thing that we need is more services for victims. Because we have this strange idea that someone leaves a situation of forced labor or forced prostitution on Tuesday, and then by Friday, they're ready to go to a new job and start all over. And it takes time.
There are reasons to be optimistic. Law enforcement and NGOs are working to arrest traffickers and save victims. Celebrities are speaking out to raise awareness, while politicians enact tougher laws. Ordinary people are becoming more vigilant. Individual stories like the ones told to Great Decisions show that there's hope for victims and that their voices must be heard in order to end modern slavery.
Great Decisions is America's largest discussion program on global affairs. Discussion groups meet in community centers, libraries, places of worship, and homes across the country to discuss global issues with their community. Participants read the 8-topic briefing book, meet to discuss each topic, and complete a ballot, which shares their views with Congress. To start or join a discussion group in your community, visit fpa.org or call 1-800-477-5836. Great Decisions is produced by the Foreign Policy Association in association with Thomson Reuters. Funding for Great Decisions is provided by PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP and the Nelson B. Delavan Foundation.